So in the world of slap bass, it's very easy for it to sound cheesy or quite dated. And that's a real shame, because it's a really extra facet to the bass player's sort of sound palette, really. You know, there's all sorts of rhythmic things that you can do, and if you and the drummer are locked in, it can sound really nice. However, it can get in the way because it's quite spiky. So if you're going to play something that's slap, it has to be really, really subtle in order for it to work properly. Now, my favourite slap bass of all time is a tune off this album. This is Mr. Hands by Herbie Hancock from 1980. And it's a tune called Just Around the Corner, last one on side 1. And the bass player is a guy called Freddie Washington. I googled him and found a few other things that he played on, but it's really, really good. Take a listen to it, and I'm going to show you what that main riff does. And I'm going to play it at normal tempo first and then slow it down with a few sort of techniques along the way. So. So that's 2 goes through the riff there. So it doesn't start on beat 1, it actually starts slightly before the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, da-da-da. So that G, 3rd fret, is the first note of the bar. So when you're practicing something like this, it's very, very useful to have a drum rhythm that's really basic, that has 16th hi-hats. Dig, dig, gat, dig, 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 gat, dig, dig, gat. So that those 16th notes are neatly divided into 4 packages of 4 with the kick and the snare. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, to make up your entire bar. So. Everything there fitted with an imaginary hi-hat that was in my head. So one of the 16th hi-hats. Now what we've got is here we've got a slap on 1, a hammer on 2, and then a slap on 3. So it actually makes the dynamic go ga-do-ah, like that. It's sort of medium, quiet, and then louder. So having slap bass that is dynamic also helps its cause, if you like. If I go, it just sounds dreadful, whereas everything's really quiet. If I take the volume down and play it, it's just very, very gentle, and that's what actually helps keep the rhythm accurate as well. So, as before, with the slap bass, you have a piano hammer, essentially. If that's the piano string, and you press the key, the hammer has a rest point, which is just above the string, and then the weight of the hammer, the inertia of it, actually allows it to keep going very briefly and come back, like that. And that's what you want to do with this. If I do this, it'll just slap the string with no note because you've damped the string at the same time as hitting it. Now what you can do is you can use this part of your thumb to land sort of where the pickup and the scratch plate is, to prevent your thumb from going too far. So if I just bring this round here, so I've got a kind of rotating wrist here, which helps also because if I did that like that, I've generated this sort of reciprocating motion where one action helps the other. So, going back to Just Around the Corner, that riff is in G. So, Now this also works because some of the slap notes and pick notes are ghost notes. That's a ghost note, and then you've got your note. Now it helps also to play very slowly because there's an awful lot of synchronization that has to happen between the hands. If you do it nice and slowly, that's the reason for slow practice also, is that you're actually practicing what happens between notes. I know that sounds a bit weird, but actually it would be the same as trying to talk with no punctuation. So you just can't do it. You have to, things have to be pigeonholed into sort of areas for it to make sense. I'm also muting this by lifting the notes of my left hand slightly so that my fingers are still touching the string but not all the way. Not all the way off. Otherwise I end up with that. So, from the beginning, 3, 1, hammer the 2, 3, and again. And again, with a set of 3s after that. So that's your first bit. Then we've got a 3 on the next string, a C, a hammer D, pick on the 3rd on the D string, which is an F. So we've got this. Now, ideally, you also have a ghost note between the D and the F. There it is. So that you've got 4 things rather than 3. If it was 3, it can sound a bit sort of false, whereas it just gives it a bit of weight. So. That's the next bit. So far. There we are. And then the next bit is it's some octaves. Now when you play these, when you slap a note there and pick the next note, you would lift the first finger off the previous note in order to shut it up. Otherwise you end up with this. Both notes at once, which isn't necessarily a problem in octaves, but it does make it a little bit tighter if you do mute the first note, leaving just the second one. And then you just go up to 6th fret, 5th, 4th and 3rd. Try not to look at this hand. Here there are, what, 20 frets and 4 different strings, so there are 80 different positions on here and there are only 4 here. So think of this as your gears. You wouldn't look at your gear stick in the car when you're driving because A, you'd select the wrong gear, and B, you'd start killing people. So you don't need to look at this. You just need to try and judge the distance between the strings, regardless if you use fingers, thumb or plectrum. So that riff in its entirety then, slowly. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then it's going around again. And that would have been worked out in the studio. You know, they would have been sitting there, jamming along. Nobody would have written anything out. It would have been, oh yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. So naturally, there will be variations in that riff. You could have this. Although it wouldn't be scrappy like that was. Although, because this is jazz, it's going to be a little bit more precise with some of those riffs than maybe it would be, you know, if it was, I don't know, rock tune or whatever. But the thing is, all of these musicians would have had all this in mind, would have had this sort of this air of simplicity. I mean, I know it sounds complicated, but they, you know, it wouldn't have been this. Because it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the song because it's too much. Don't forget, you know, it's drums, keys, bass, there's some sort of synth parts on. There are no vocals here, which perhaps is what allows this to be a little bit more sort of exploratory than if there were words there. There's still a synth line though. So there is Just Around the Corner by Herbie Hancock, as played by the bass player Freddie Washington.